Hello and welcome everybody to BB Dev Days on another session, Modernizing Blackbaud Financial Edge NXT Data Workflows. And I am joined here today by my old friend Bill Walsh from IBW and by my new friend Wadi Pazos from Esgenio. I'm going to turn it over to them and let them get started on this presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derek. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody. We're going to talk a little bit today about overall modernizing financial edge NXT data workflows. Hopefully that's why you're here, focused with modernizing analytics and Microsoft Fabric. The outline for today, we're going to talk through what's the business case, so to put some context around the demo that you're going to see. We'll talk through the architecture so you get a chance to kind of see the components and how they're constructed. This is focused as a demo, so you're going to see this live. Wadi's going to really walk you through how it works, what he built, and kind of how it all goes together. We're going to take a look at some real world examples of kind of amplifying once you get data into Fabric, what can you do with it with some what we call maybe bonus content and Sky add-in concepts. And there will be some takeaways provided and resources after. So with that, maybe we could do some introductions. Wadi.
Hello, everyone, and glad to be on stage at BB Dev Days again. It's an old haunt of mine, and just really happy to be back. So hello to everyone I know out there. So I'm an OG, I suppose. Been around in this technology business for many years, probably more than 30 as a hobbyist, but 30 plus professionally. And most of those have been as a Blackbaud partner delivering nonprofit technology. I've been around since the early days of BBCon and the Charleston Convention Center way back in the days. And some of you may know me as the founder and formerly of PaperSave, which is a longtime Blackbaud technology partner. So Esgenio is my new company, and we're bringing lots of cool solutions to nonprofit space and specifically Blackbaud market.
Thanks, Wadi. And I'm Bill Walsh. Some of you probably know me from former association with Blackbaud, both with the Developer Days events as well as products like Razor's Edge and Blackbaud CRM. It was great running into Wadi when I set out on my own. I just love working with him. He's got values that match mine, highly principled, high quality of service and delivery. We get along really well. He reminds me of, honestly, of days when I would work with Ben Lambert, and Ben and I would sit in a room, Wadi, and we'd whiteboard out something really cool, like how an Outlook plugin should work. And then he'd go build it, and I'd go test it and roll it through updates, and we'd kind of work. And that kind of reminded me today as we were going through all of our work together. And I mean that as a compliment, Wadi. I hope you would take it as such. I think many people here would recognize Ben Lambert's name. And
I love Ben. Good friend.
Such a solid contributor. Now, some of you may be surprised to see me in a financial edge session, since my passion and love has often been expressed more in the fundraising realm. In fact, personal note, I met my wife, who was the senior designer for the Razor's Edge while I was at Blackbaud. So literally have a love and passion for Razor's Edge, but and overall fundraising. But I'm excited about really digging into similar concepts that we'll explore today, and financial scenarios that relate to the overall journal and transaction entries. And the Sky API, to some degree is designed to be somewhat neutral in the sense of which product it is. Let's deliver a capability. And I think that's what you're going to see today as we kind of walk through how do we get data out and manage it. And that'll take us to the problem statement. So if we take a look at the next slide, let's talk about maybe why you're here and what this challenge is. And I should mention that similar challenges exist for Razor's Edge also, but we decided to go after FE. And the reason was because we had a client. We had a client who's using the database download for Financial Edge and just said, what could we do differently? And maybe this is something some of you have thought about or seen in your world. And if you're using the database download, if you look at the picture in the bottom left, you sort of get the FTP process to pull a file down from the cloud. You have to rehydrate it or install it into a local SQL Server environment. And you're probably delivering it to information from it through things like SSRS reports to your users there. Side story, as I look at that little icon in Blackbaud in the 90s, just to give you a quick history lesson, we all had to wear ties. So we were a bunch of little IBMers running around R&D looking just like that little guy there. So when I saw him, it kind of cracked me up. Fortunately, I think Tony Bacher eliminated ties in the late 90s and we went all more casual. Otherwise, what developer would show up to work, right? So the challenge that you think about here is that this download process can be fragile. You have to have IT kind of supervising it, hand-holding it, watching it, have some infrastructure. And it may be tied to older report models like SSRS. The data is not necessarily in real time. And the eventual strategy is not announced, and I'm not trying to put any words into Blackbaud's mouth. I don't know what their thinking is. But what happens in a day when the database download goes away as Sky becomes the prevalent and dominant thinking around the data in the cloud? So it creates some challenges, but we have opportunity with that. And I would probably just make sure I highlight that it doesn't have to be an FE database download. You don't have to be doing this today. This is just what spurred Wani and I to get in a room and say, what are we going to do about it? And what we're going to do about it is decide to do something different and use a more modern era with Fabric to create an approach that gets rid of the time consumption and the challenge and the fragility of that environment to create always fresh dashboards that are near real time, still based on a timer, but pulling from the live Sky APIs, making the data more specific and relevant in Fabric towards roles and information sets that allow people to consume just what they need to see. And as we're going to explore a little bit today, set the stage for future AI or automation efforts. So Wadi, it was really fun as we got together to kind of go through this, and really excited to see what you've done with it.
All right, thank you, Bill. So just to set the stage, so basically, the solution that we created here and to share with all of you as a prototype is a Microsoft Fabric pipeline. Basically, when and Fabric's an incredible product, and Blackbaud Sky is incredible as well as an integration platform. About a year ago or so, when we started getting heavily into Fabric and bringing all of our engineers up as Fabric architects, we started getting work building Fabric-based warehouses and business intelligence frameworks that leveraged Blackbaud information primarily through Sky. Somewhere along the way, and initially it was using the endpoints that were out there, which sometimes made it sort of challenging to pull bulk data sets. Somewhere along the way, Blackbaud released a query endpoint, which is a game changer because it allows bulk data access, which is perfect for extract, transform, and load processes, ETLs for short, which are what data pipelines in Fabric are, to bring in bulk sets of data. So the solution that we're going to go over uses the query API endpoint. So it's all kind of agnostic, honestly, to FE or RE and CRM at some point when they have query API for CRM. So you can really use this interchangeably for both. So it leverages query API endpoint, data pipelines, and Fabric, and preps everything ready for Power BI dashboards and other interfaces, cool interfaces that Bill will talk about later on, including Sky add-ins, incorporating Copilot. And there was a great session from Georgia Tech that just finished that I need to finish watching because I had to skip out in the end, that kind of shows a little bit of the power of once you get things into Fabric, what you can do with Copilot. And we have some examples as well. And then also workflow integration with Power Automate and other workflow tools once you have a great aggregated data platform in Fabric. So what we're going to be looking at today is a pipeline. here is an architecture of what the pipeline does. Basically, it starts first with a token data store, which is kind of where tokens are maintained for accessing Sky API. I won't go into the complexities of tokens necessarily, but this manages them. The prototype manages them pretty effectively. So we're getting our refresh tokens from the token store. We're calling the token endpoint to get a fresh set of access tokens and refresh tokens to then go ahead and store again in the token store for the next time the pipeline runs. Then again, through a Sky API call, we're going to be initiating an RE or in this case an FE query, but it can be an RE or FE query using the query API endpoint. Then there's that kind of kicks off. If you've never used a query API, basically there's an endpoint that kicks off a query to run, and then you kind of wait for it to run. So there's another step in the pipeline where it's looping, calling a check status endpoint for the query API to see if the query instance that you kicked off in the prior step finished running. And if not, then it keeps trying, waiting 10 seconds in between. No, that might not be easy to see on the slide, but it says that there, and you can see it in the takeaways that we'll give to you as well as in the prototype that I'll show in a minute. And then once it's finished executing, then basically the way the query API works is, that check status endpoint will then give you a URL to the file that contains the query results as a CSV, right? And then we use that. If you've ever used pipelines in Fabric, you know that one of the most versatile activities in pipelines is copy data activity. Basically allows you to copy data from here to there. So the source of our data in this case will be the URL of that CSV output, and the destination will be just a table inside of a warehouse in Fabric. And you'll see how that all works here in a second. So let's go on to our demo. I'm going to stop sharing here and then share my screen. Okay. So my screen should be visible here. Try to zoom in here as much as possible. Hopefully this is all pretty visible for you. Okay. And this, for those that may or may not be familiar, is a Microsoft Fabric pipeline. Okay. And it's a pipeline that works pretty much exactly like my diagram says. So we'll walk through every step of this and the settings. I'm not going to create this slide for you. And actually, you won't have to either, because at the end of the session, and I've already put it into the chat, so you can, look at this either now or later. We've got a post on our website where we're actually sharing this, basically this pipeline. We're giving it away, sharing it, and teaching you in that post how to configure it yourselves, because this has my specific configuration. So for you to download and use it, you'll have to make some changes. So there's a step-by-step walkthrough on how to use this yourself, and you can continue, we're giving this away, so you can continue using this as a framework and base of pipelines that talk to Sky API through the query API for RE and FE data. So again, basically the first step is to get the refresh token from the config. So basically the way this starts off is there's a data warehouse. I've called it here the good nonprofit warehouse, and a table within it that I've created. Oh, that loads here. Called config. So I'll give that a little time to load. So there's the table right there, the config table, and it's a pretty straightforward table. Doesn't have much other than names and values for configs, and in there you'll see a single row. Well, we've also got the access token, but that's not relevant anymore, but a row for the refresh token. So basically what the pipeline is doing is it's pulling the current refresh token from that config table in its first step. And that's just a simple lookup activity in Microsoft Fabric with a simple query, get the value from the config where the name is the refresh token. And that pulls it right there, right? And now you have that in a variable. One thing that's kind of important, and more details about this in that blog post that I talked to you about, but this pipeline relies on a bunch of variables to kind of save state along the way. So one of them is the current refresh token. So this particular lookup activity, once it gets its value, it is going to save it inside of that refresh token, current refresh token field. So, and that's so that it can update it later on. You'll see that in a second. All right. So the next step is to, that refresh token, was from the prior run, right? So you need to get an updated set of tokens. So one of the things that we've done here to simplify things is we're not reutilizing access tokens. If you've ever used the OAuth flow in Sky, you know that typically best practice is to reuse your access token until it expires and then get a new one with the refresh token. In this case, trying to simplify things here, so I'm just getting a new refresh token every time and a new access token every time this runs, right? And then saving that refresh token for the next time so we can get a new access token. Because once you use a refresh token, then it expires. So that's all in that documentation in developer.blackbaud.com. So, so Fabric has a neat activity called a web activity, which is basically a way to make web API calls, right? And in essence, the way you set this up, and again, it's in the instructions, there's an endpoint that's set up, which is basically the token endpoint from Blackbaud. That's the URL there. And then it's using that token endpoint and passing to it some things you have to do just to talk to Blackbaud Sky API. So you've got to pass along your Sky subscription API key, which I won't show here for the moment. I should have to probably reset it because I think it showed in that last screenshot. That's not a problem. And then the body, which is basically the instruction to tell the token endpoint what you want. So you want to basically get a new refresh token, and you're passing along your client ID and client secret, which again is part of the variables. So again, I'll have to reset, and then it gets you a new refresh token. So the output of this then goes over to these next activities, and basically it's the output that comes back from the call to the token endpoint, right? So now, looking at this one, we'll come back up to this one's the Meteor one in a second. So the first thing we want to do, or then one of the next things we want to do, as you'll see here in this branching, is to now update the refresh token in the config, right? So we're going to take this is using the script activity with Fabric. So this is a way to execute a SQL script against a SQL-based source, right? Like the warehouse is, okay? And in that SQL script, basically, what we're doing is we're calling to take the updated token output, right? So basically, the output from this web activity, right? And specifically the refresh token field and property in that output, right? Which is what's returned to you from the token endpoint. And then updating the config, setting that, that to the value field where the name is FE refresh token. So it's basically a simple SQL statement that's just updating your refresh token. So nothing super special there. On the other branch, we're actually going to kick off now with our new access token that we also got from the prior get updated tokens from Sky activity. We're going to call the initiate query API. We're going to call the query endpoint to start a query instance, right? So, so in this one, it's a little meatier, okay? So the way the the query API works is there's an endpoint for that too. Again, I'm using a web activity to make calls through Fabric to web APIs, and that's the token endpoint, right? That's all in the documentation on the Sky documentation, developer.blackbaud.com. You have to pass in some parameters into the URL with the product and module. So again, to make this RE, just have to change that to RE and set there's no module for RE, but you'll set the product to RE. Again, all that is in the documentation. I won't go into that specifically. And then you have the body, which is basically the instruction to the query API and what query you want to execute. So I'm executing a query with ID 597. If I go over to FE, that's this query. And how did I know? I opened up my query that I created through the web query interface that exists now, and I just copied a link to the query, which basically is this up here, and that gave me my query ID. So I know my query ID that way. Okay, so that's the ID to the query I want to call. I won't go through some of the other options, but there are different options in here, including output format to CSV and how do you want your fields to look and etc. But the most important one here is this ask field. So this is how you can pass parameters to the query. So my query has in the criteria an ask for the post date. So it's basically this query is a list of general ledger transactions. They're expense transactions, and takes it's limited by account code just so it's smaller in this example, and also ask for the post date, right? So in order to pass that on, you've got to set your ask fields here the way this is set here. Again, that's all in the documentation, but basically you pass in the query field ID, which you can get from in the options here. If you look at the query JSON, I won't go totally in there, but in there you'll see the field ID for the ask is in there, and that's how I got the field ID. Well, that's a lot of this is all in the documentation. So I got the field ID. I'm saying basically I want the filter value to be this. So January 1st of this year, and the operator to be greater than or equal to. So in essence, telling the query, give me all those expense transaction results that are greater, where the post date is greater than or equal to January 1st of this year. Okay. And then in the headers, you've got to pass in a few things. You've got to pass in your authorization, which is where you pass in the token. So you have to pass in the word bearer, and then concatenate the token that you got from the prior output, right, up here, and get updated tokens from Sky. So that's how it's authenticating your subscription key again, and then the content type that's necessary, right? So that's basically what starts off the query, right? Then, like in the diagram, you start going into this while loop, right? Waiting for the query to execute. So if I expand on this and take a look, right? Just going to dive in there, right? So first thing it does is it waits 5 seconds. I said 10 seconds in my slide. I lied, but 5 seconds. So it waits 5 seconds. Then it calls another endpoint from Sky API. This is the query execution endpoint, where basically you're checking on how, what's the status of query that's running. That's the endpoint URL. And again, you pass in your authorization stuff. I won't go through that again. And then the important thing is in the relative URL, right? So basically at the end of the URL is going to append some extra parameters, and the parameters that we're appending are the query ID, which we get from the prior activity that ran, the initiate query API ID. Query API, if it runs successfully, it returns a result, and one of the properties in the result is the ID. So that you're passing that in as a parameter. And then some other static parameters here. Again, if you're interrogating RE, you choose RE for the product. And also some other options here, including, which is really important, to make sure that in the results that it returns back from the check on status, that it gives you the the URL of the CSV results, right? So that's the call. Now, from there, it goes into an if then check, right? And in the if then, pretty straightforward. The criteria on whether the if is true or not is based on the value from the get query execution status. It returns an output, and one of the fields is the status field. So if the value is completed, then that if condition becomes true, right? So that just means that the query finished running, right? So if the query finished running, then basically there's only one thing to do is set a variable, basically a flag saying success, query ran, it's done, right? And that's important because that's the variable that the while loop is checking to know whether it should finish or not. So as soon as that variable is set to done, then the while loop stops executing, right? If for whatever reason this failed, then stops the iteration, so you don't continue iterating, right? And then it just dies right there, right? While I go through the rest of this, just in the interest of time, I'm actually going to kick this off, so it's running in the background while I go through the rest of this. It takes like 2 minutes to run, just so you guys can see that it runs. And so after the while loop, right, and you can watch down there while I'm doing this, see the way execution shows. But once it finishes the query execution and it breaks out of this while loop because the status on the check status endpoint returns completed, then we should have everything we need in order to actually do the copy of data to our data store, right? So one thing to take note here is, this is like fully self-contained and can run again over and over again as often as you want. And I'll go over some of the things you might want to consider doing if you actually use this for a production scenario. But the source of this query is going to be, and this is actually one of the gotchas. So the first source is, and you can have lots of source for copy data activity. The source I'm using here is an HTTP source, right? So that means get your data from an HTTP URL or endpoint that might contain a file, right? Like ours does. It's a CSV. Now, the interesting thing here is, and this is a Fabric limitation, is you cannot have a dynamic source URL for a connection to an HTTP source in Fabric. So I noticed in all of my work, right, that the domain or host name for pretty much everything that comes back from the query API is this nsa-pusa01.app.blackbaud.net, right? One of the parts that makes this sort of brittle, right, is if Blackbaud changed that, then you would have to come in here and change that as well, right? Because you cannot use dynamically completely the URL that comes back. Is just, unfortunately, a Fabric limitation. So something just to think through, okay? The relative URL is where the magic happens. So basically what we're doing there is we're taking the output from the get query execution status, which has the actual real live URL. As a matter of fact, if you see my my pipeline finish running, if we go and we check the get query execution status and look at its output, you'll see here that in what it returns this SAS URL, right? There it is. That's the beginning part of it, like I showed you before. And in essence, we have a variable also in the pipeline, which has that same value, that base URL value. So in the relative URL here, basically what I've done is I've, eliminated that from the result that comes back from the check execution status, so that we only have, the part on the right-hand side, the rest of the URL to deal with, and that gets appended basically to the base URL is in essence what this is doing, right? So that gives us the actual full URL for the source. The file format is delimited with CSV. I won't go into that. And then the destination, I've just got it auto-creating a table every time called query results. And down here in advance, I've got it, before it does auto-create it, checking to make sure it exists, it drops it every time. So that's so that at least this particular pipeline doesn't care about the fields that come back from the query. It's always going to recreate the table anyway. So you can use pretty much any query, that your heart desires on FE or RE. It'll recreate the table with the way this is set up, which is why there's no mappings. But typically in a production scenario, you would actually do true mappings to real, data types on both sides to make sure that you've got the right output going into your results, right? And that's basically it. And this ran. So if we go back to Good Nonprofit now and look at our query results, you should see 10 rows there that came from the same FE query. That if we looked at the results here and use greater than or equal to 0101 2025, it should be those same 10 rows. And that's basically it for the demo. So it took a little bit, but hopefully that made a lot of sense for you all. So let me go back to the slides to talk through some things here. So basically what you need to run this demo is you need a Blackbaud Sky developer account. You need to get at least an initial set of access token, initial refresh token. So in my post, that the link is down there, give you an example how to do that using Postman. There's probably a bunch of different ways you can do it, but Postman's probably the easiest non-technical way. So, and I had Bill test this, and he's not a programmer, and he got through it all, so I know it works. So you need a refresh token, and just be mindful that your refresh token could expire before the pipeline runs. At some point, it's around for like a year almost, but if for whatever reason you hadn't used the pipeline in a year, it could, expire, in which case you need a new refresh token. And you can follow the same instructions in my post to do that. You've got to define the query first. So the query is your shape. So the way that I think about this is, right, this puts the power into the business users for the business intelligence people, right? So rather than the business intelligence people having to figure out and think through, right? So think of the scenario that Bill was talking about earlier, right? So if you got a download of the RE or FE database, right? Well, you've got to understand that database schema and figure it out, right? So this absolves you from all of that if you think about it, because if you start from a query in FE or RE, that's already a very good user interface for defining shape of data, right? And your business users can define that, right? So, and you have access to calculated fields and a bunch of other aggregations that already exist as part of the query pool, right? Available to you rather than having to recreate and think all that through if all you had was the raw database. But you do need the queries, and you're limited through this pattern with what's available in query. This demo and sample doesn't deal with deltas. It assumes full refreshes, so that's another enhancements you can do. There may be some metadata is not available in query, and then you're always dependent on the Blackbaud roadmap for query, as well as this demo doesn't deal with API limits or any orchestration around that. That's more pro stuff. This is just to get you across the finish line on just how do I even talk to FE or RE query with Fabric. But like I mentioned, you gain scalable access to RE and FE data and to smart fields calculations, aggregations, etc. And then the full Fabric power to create pipelines, workflows, dashboards with metrics, KPIs, aggregation, and a basis for modern analytics, including using AI with it, right? So just quickly, some additional considerations again for production use. Wasn't encrypting and decrypting the refresh tokens in the token store. That's something to do for production. You're going to want to actually set what you're outputting to in terms of the tables with their actual data types and do the right mapping, adding some fault tolerance along the way to retry failures in the pipeline, email activities to send you alerts when it's done and when it fails, updating logic to reuse the access token rather than going the cheap route like I did, although that's perfectly fine. There is no shortage of refresh tokens that Blackbaud can give you. And then, yeah, monitoring fault tolerance for any changes in that root SAS URI because of that limitation in Fabric. Although I did post something, so hopefully Microsoft will fix that at some point, allow totally dynamic URLs. Solution works well for, kind of probably low volume scenarios and not super high production use. It's always better to build a pro code bridge to Fabric, and that's how we usually do it. But I wanted to show you this because it kind of gets you down to like the nitty gritty of how this works. Even if you had a pro code bridge, really what the pro code bridge is doing is encapsulating a lot of these considerations in it. And then you use that from Fabric instead of direct Sky API. And with that, I will turn it back over to Bill to show you what the neat things you can possibly do if you do this.
Awesome. Really powerful, Wadi, being able to kind of pull it into Fabric and get the data there. And I think where I want to go next is to help you all understand some ideas. Once you have information in Fabric, what can you do with it? What's the point? What is, in your world, something exciting, interesting, innovative, unique, looking ahead to the future? So I've taken Wadi's workflow and I did install it myself. And my two biggest challenges, honestly, were I got confused by the refresh token and the access token. So I was plugging in the access token and it bombed out, and I didn't want to call Wadi, so I figured it out myself. And then there's a little thing in the Blackbaud windows where you have to click on a button to copy the IDs, and I set the focus on the window instead of copying, and so I copied the old ID, and so all my IDs were the same, and it failed then. So Wadi, I did not call you 10 times, did I? I just spent an hour trying to go back through all the steps 3 times. And I'm not a pro coder by any means. I really kind of hate writing code. I like copy paste and following tutorials. So I can follow tutorials really, really well if I just stick with it. And so what we want to talk about here is the idea of taking this a little bit further. So AI enhanced workflows, doing Power BI reports and Sky add-ins. So I'm going to demo a little bit of each of these as I stop this and share my screen. Remind myself how to do that, and hopefully this works. And we should be popping up to my environment. So if you saw Wadi's BB Dev Days environment, he only had a couple of items, and I've been sort of just enhancing that to have some fun with it. So I've been building out, for example, some AI insights to tag on after the workflow runs, thinking about some fraud alerts and transaction insights. I took a look at not only taking the database from the query and populating a SQL table from it that Wadi did, but what would happen if I started thinking about what a dean might need to see with different data coming together from finance, from transactions, from fundraising, and how do I think about Fabric as a unification of multiple systems, not just one, and then deliver that as an adaptive card to a user. So all these are some samples that I've built for today. And one of the key things that it does is simply tag on at the end of the pipeline. So Wadi's stopped right here with copy data. I added a notebook called Generate AI Insights. And I built multiples of these, sort of the Dean's Insights, the GL Insights, and some other points of view that say, since the data is here in Fabric, can I just use the automated workflows in Fabric to do that? Now, in my world, what I wanted to do was kind of make it obvious and simple. So I used Microsoft Teams, but you can do you can use email or other types of tools. This was just a way to kind of make it fun and interesting. So for example, I started posting into my Dev Days team channel. And the first thing I did was create a Fabric AI assistant and do a post and feed it some information. And you can kind of see my development iteration each time, because first time I didn't pass anything in. I just wanted to see that it worked. And then I started passing in some journal entries, and I started making some mistakes with how I was doing it. But I eventually got to a place where I was able to say, all right, as an AI fraud assistant and controller, read some of the GL transactions and take a look at 5 best practice areas of potential fraud and post an English language text to the channel to notify the CFO, an auditor, compliance, review team of potential fraud alerts. And so I did some research into things that might be common, duplicate payments, inconsistent reference details. I took a look at some areas like duplicate transactions, transactions at the very end of the month, the first transaction from a vendor that had never been recorded before, transactions that take place on a weekend. So I coded all that as a primer to the AI assistant and said, take a look at the transactions and produce a text alert in Teams that someone could monitor. So that's just an example of that AI assistant card that comes out. And the next one I wanted to tackle was called Dean's Insights. And so the first time
Bill,
I did it, yeah.
Pause you just for a second. We've got about 4 minutes left. So don't want to let Bill continue, but if you've got questions for Bill and Waddy, please get them into the chat or the Q&A now so that we have time at the end.
Thank you, Derek. I'll move a little faster because I did some Dean's Insights analysis in a text-based format, kind of tell me about things that a dean might want to know in words and take the data. And then I moved that finally to close this with a card, building an adaptive card with interactivity back to the databases. And the beauty of an adaptive card, as described by Ben Lambert in his post on the blog forum, is that you can create a Sky add-in. So while I'm showing it in Teams, you can also easily take this type of card and put it as an interface item for a dean at a school or a college inside FE or RE. And as I close out that portion of the demo, just to wrap up what we've just seen, as we kind of close out here, we took a look at adding a next point on Fabric. We took a look at adding that as a fraud assistant, as building a Dean's Insight assistant, and then finally building an adaptive component that potentially would eventually become a Power BI dashboard. And a reminder for those not in higher education, mission delivery, missionaries in a faith-based world, program project coordinators, and spending managers, the goal is to reach people with the data with important components where they live. Thank you. What do we should?
To just wrap it up, listen, I think you can do a lot of this yourself with what we showed you. But if you need help, if you get beyond your level of sophistication, or if you want to do some of those cool things that Bill is talking about, we provide together a bunch of technology services for Blackbaud clients. There's a list of them there. They're on the marketplace. There are links in this document. Reach out because we can help you create. We're pretty creative and have done some really neat solutions, and hopefully this will be helpful for so many Fabric engineers out there trying to figure out how to call Sky API and the Query API.
Bill, Waddy, thank you so much for this. Folks, if you're still with us, please do take the next 60 seconds before this session ends to complete the survey for Bill and Waddy. Not only does that survey help us as we plan content for future BB Dev Days and BBCon and other sessions like this, but that could help Bill and Waddy get a free pass to BBCon, where you could see them in Philadelphia. We hope to see you there as well. So please do take the time to fill that out. You guys, apparently your session was so clear that no one had any questions, which is fantastic. And of course, the session will be available to view afterwards. I'm going to go back and watch this again because I think I need to watch it at half speed to fully absorb it. And also the slides will be available for download as well. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy BB Dev Days.
Thank you, everyone.